Just remember what I've taught you.
What the fuck is that?
Hey, yo.
Oh, we're back again. Oh, goody, goody. It's so nice to be here. It's so nice to be here in your ears. Thank you, thank you, thank you for having me back. It is wonderful. Just absolutely wonderful to do this one more time. Hi, everybody. How are you? Now, I got told on Monday that I didn't even introduce myself, so allow me to take a moment here and introduce myself. Hi, I'm John. I'm the writer next door. This is the Writer's Chat. If you don't know what the Writer's Chat is, it's basically a Q&A for the next 2 hours, where I'm going to answer questions from all different corners and reaches of social media, as well as the questions of those people in chat. Twitch chat, hi. Zoom, say hi to Twitch. Twitch, say hi to Zoom. And everybody say hi to YouTube in the future. And hello. I'm doing fine today. Thank you so much for asking. I'm delightful. It's been a really, really good day. I'm good. Thank you so much for asking. Dinner was delicious. I'm in a pretty good mood. I'm wearing a great t-shirt. Life is great. Now, there we go. Now we're streaming. Now we're all good. So, ladies and gentlemen, guys, gals, non-binary pals, friends, writers, makers, doers, dreamers, planners, aspirants, apostates, rebels, transgressives, dancers, hula hoop enthusiasts, cheese lovers, cracker lovers, anybody who knows how to make pretzels, the various people who understand what a heel lock is on a shoe, pen enthusiasts, backpackers, room cleaners, single parents, not single parents, large couples, small couples, mixed couples, diverse multi-generational homes, freedom fighters, guerrillas, practical terrorists, news critics, news pundits, even some lawyers and paralegals, some private detectives, and most importantly, the comrades. It is a pleasure to be right back here in your ear one more time. And now I'm even up in the corner in the little screen. This is going to be good. This is going to be a fine night. Now, remember, as per usual, we will be seeing if the connection holds, wobbles, crashes, etc. So far, so good. No one sneeze. Everything seems to be working. I think, though, we need to get started. I don't have any ad. I forgot to make the ad graphic. I'm really sorry. My bad. But one thing I can tell you, one thing I would love for you to know before we get started, one of the best things you can do, the best things you can do to not only please and sate the hunger of the algorithm gods, but also to make the life better of any creative you admire, follow, or interested in, or take work from, leave a review. Take 5 minutes. Give them a rating. Write a little blurb, a sentence, 2 sentences. It doesn't have to be a whole novel in itself. Just say something positive. Talk about how much you like it. Put it out there. Let them know that they're not talking to an empty room. Let them know that they're having an impact on you. It literally will change the whole trajectory of somebody's day. And practicing compassion is always good. So there's your ad. Have some air horns. And now, let's go hit these questions, shall we? Question 1, a technical one. Is an action beat a better way to start my novel than a dialogue beat? Okay. The word I want to talk about first and foremost is better. more so than action, more so than dialogue. We're gonna go after better here, because this is a real problem for some writers. They have to know the best way. They have to know the right way. They have to know like exactly what they're supposed to do in perfect, like the totally get a gold star kind of way. And there isn't one. There isn't. That's part of the risk. That's part of the imperfect creative process. You get to do your thing however you want. You can always rewrite your thing better than it was before, because it better is a word of comparison. But there is no one universal standardized way to literally do anything in writing. You can punctuate differently than somebody else. You can write dialogue differently than somebody else. Your action beats can look different. Your emotional beats can look different. Your stories will look different. Your covers, your titles, your fonts, you name it. Everybody's going to do this thing different from everybody else. It's all an individual field of creativity. This is not to be feared. This is just a matter of, well, I'm going to do it my way. You're going to do it your way, and everybody's happy. What you need to focus on is, how best can I do it for me? When it comes down to how do I start my novel, you can start it with an action beat. The advantage of starting with an action beat is that you immediately gain tempo. You immediately pick the reader up and keep things moving. And if you're wondering what tempo is, you can go check out the Monday stream that's over on YouTube called Every Sentence is a Camera, where we broke that down. But you can start at pace. Grab the reader, hold them, move them into action. They can follow along. It feels urgent. It feels exciting. This is good. Totally fine starting with an action beat. What's the downside of starting with an action beat? Well, usually, not always, but usually, starting with an action and having stuff happen doesn't really give us a chance to learn anything about characters. They're too busy doing stuff. We can't stop and slow things down and get inside their heads, learn about how they feel, learn about what they want, that kind of stuff. Because the action beat's happening. We're too busy, in the car chase. We're too busy in the fist fight. We're too busy fighting the monster. We're too busy doing stuff. It's just different. We are promoting movement and tempo and inertia and sort of the vibe of the world and the vibe of the story. And we're choosing that over, hey, this is the character, this is how they feel, get to know them, connect with them. You're going to follow them for the next couple hundred pages. A dialogue beat is characters talking. Now, you can have talking in an action beat, but that doesn't make it a dialogue beat. A dialogue beat is where the majority of the stuff, the majority of the things you've written down are people talking, whether that's one person talking to another or multiple people talking to each other, whatever. But it's a dialogue beat. Now, dialogue beats generally are considered to be of slower tempo than action beats because it's people talking. Writers take that to mean that when people are talking, the world freezes so that the talking can happen uninterrupted by the events of the world. The planet stops spinning, the clouds stop moving through the sky, the birds don't chirp, because you want to drive that reader's focus to the words, which is wrong, because one of the things that helps dialogue feel alive, one of the things that helps dialogue feel engaging is the fact that it's happening in its context. So while two people are walking across the airport to pick up someone else coming off a flight, the world is still moving as they're talking. It's called a walk and talk for a reason. So don't pause the world when you have dialogue. And understand that your dialogue is, as we had talked about on the Monday stream, which is now available on YouTube, youtube.com/John Adamus, my name. Dialogue is reactive. So by keeping the world alive, by keeping the world moving, by having other stuff than just the talking on the page, you're giving the characters a chance to express themselves, which gives the reader a chance to learn about character. So if you're going to start with an action beat, you're developing how you're going to write. You start with a dialogue beat, you're developing how you're going to introduce and develop character. One is not better than the other. And honestly, if there was a universal better theory, do this, like a perfect video game walkthrough strategy, don't you think we would have figured it out by now? We've been telling stories for millennia. Don't you think somebody would have written it down and marketed it? Have you seen capitalism lately, comrades? Like, If there was a unifying single theory, we'd all be doing it and every book would be boring as hell. So instead of trying to find the one perfect, zero flaws, max success, good RNG strat, or figure out whatever the book meta is, you get to pick and choose what you want to do. Is an action beat better? I don't know. What is it you're trying to accomplish? What's your story? What do you want the reader to experience and think and imagine and see in their brain and feel when they read? Is that better accomplished by having something action-y happen? Or is that better accomplished by having some talking happen? One is not better than the other. They're just different. So it depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish. It depends on what your end goal is. It's a good question. It's a very good question. It's a technical question. But it's a good way to start tonight. Oh my God, here comes the rant. We're already ranting. It's question 2. John, what are the character cheat codes? And are they good and bad? Okay. Cheat code is not a technical term. It's a John term. I don't know if there are actual terms for what I'm about to describe. They are developments of character or things you're creating with your characters, like rules about them or statuses about them or skills they have or something. It's some element of the character's creation and development and description where whatever that thing is, you've created a situation where the character doesn't have as much struggle as they could. They don't have to work as hard. They're not challenged as much. They don't have to grow so much. But they have this cool thing. You're trading cool thing for actual story growth. And what that's really doing is giving you a very shallow, poorly made character who happens to have cool stuff. Here are some examples of cheat codes. I'm going to use a couple comic book examples because they're really clear, but you can find your own versions in the fiction you read. Being a super duper super genius, like a 0.01% of the 1% of all smart people on the planet, somebody with like multiple conflicting different PhDs. I'm also a rocket scientist and a brain surgeon and an electrical engineer and a physicist and a quantum physicist, and I'm the only one who's ever pioneered this work in a particular field of science. People like that. That's a cheat code because you're using intelligence and prioritizing intelligence. When you do that in a story and your character is hyper smart, it's impossible to get them to make a mistake. And mistakes are what makes a character interesting. The ability to have flaws, the ability for things not to succeed. Because if your character is that smart and they're always shown to be clever and witty, that might be really charming to you because you're thinking about a television actor or you're thinking about a film role and you're using that as sort of your partial template for your fiction. And that's fine if everybody wants to sound like, Benedict Cumberbatch or Robert Downey Jr. or something. But by and large, a hyper smart character is dull as shit to write because how do you give them an arc? They're really smart. They think about things in a billion trillion different ways faster than anybody else. How do you give them something to do? And if you're about to tell me, well, John, Data on Star Trek was super duper smart. Yeah, but they offset Data's super positronic net by essentially making him the imbecile character. He didn't know anything about humanity. He was trying to learn. They gave him subsequent and equally proportionate sized flaws. So that, yeah, he was super smart and super strong, but he did not grasp human interaction. Is that why Sherlock Holmes is from Watson's perspective? Yes. Yes, it is. Because when you have a character who's hyper something, and we'll talk about the other hypers in a minute, but when you have a character who's hyper something, it's boring as hell to directly follow them. Because they're not relatable. How many super duper super mega geniuses do you know? Not the people who pretend to be that, not the people who put on airs to be that, like legit mega super smart people. I don't know any. I know quite a few people who pretend to be so, but that's a flaw in and of itself. But the mega super double, quantum doctors, I don't know how to relate to that. Other cheat code. Super wealth. Wealth eliminates challenges, just like it does in real life. You can buy your way out of things. You can avoid problems by just acquiring stuff. There's never any real chance of loss. There's never any real way to harm a character. That's why most of your super duper rich characters are human, because you've got to have some very core basic way to harm them. The reason why Batman isn't both rich and immortal is that you'd lose one of the only quality traits about Batman is the fact that he's just a guy in a suit. Wealth might be great because it eliminates you as a writer having to create or shape story problems. Oh, well, they're rich. They just spend the money. It's also really lazy because it doesn't develop you as a writer. You don't really get a chance to grow anything. You don't really get a chance to push yourself and go, oh, shit, how do I solve this story problem? Now, romance authors, I'm talking to you right now. Romance authors, I know how great it is to have your character whisked off their feet by a wealthy person who is different than them. And I know how exotic that sounds because we, the human race, generally are not swept off our feet by capitalist swine. I know. I get it. But all the same, that doesn't excuse you from the responsibility of crafting story where your characters actually have to work to move forward in their arc. If you have a character who can come in and just buy a thing and not really give a shit, like, oh yeah, we need a jet to get somewhere. I bought an airport. Well, then there's no challenge. Everything can be bought. Everything can be overcome that way. That's why the most common solution to a wealthy character is to immediately impoverish them. But what that does when you do something like that, when you create a cheat code and your only twist or circumvention of it is to reduce it or eliminate it, all you're saying is the character is only a walking bank book. The character is only a bank account. The character is only their brain in a jar. That shows a severe deficit in your ability to craft a character. But let's step away from the more earthly ones. Let's get into the far out ones. How about a character who can just transform shape? Like they can just turn into things, whether that's animals or they can subvert from solid to liquid to gas, or they can turn invisible or immaterial or incorporeal or something. A character like that can't be challenged in a physical way. Because especially when there's no cost to the cheat code, like poof, they can just turn into something. Well, then they can never be captured, can they? Now, you might think, oh, well, if they're in one form, they could get cornered in that form. Yeah, but we have no cost. They could just turn into something else. That's a real problem. That's a giant size problem. Because all that shows is that you're spending a lot of time thinking about the visual and, oh man, that's so cool that I made that thing. And yeah, that's cool. And it's great if you're like 5 and on the carpet with some Legos. It's a great storytelling device. But if you're a grown-ass person trying to write a book, particularly a fantasy novel, this cheat code eliminates the danger for that character. There's no reason to relate to them. There's no reason to give a shit that they're in danger because we know they can just turn into a bird and fly away. Or we know that no matter how they're in bondage, they will immediately just turn incorporeal and drift through the wall and no prison can hold them. The solution, big giant air quotes there, getting a hernia doing all this lifting. The solution is usually to give some sort of cost to the cheat code. Well, I can do it, but only a few times a day. Well, you're not generating enough risk or challenge to offset the number of times you can do it. I can only do it twice a day. Well, good news, I've only been challenged twice today, and now the scene is ending. When your cheat codes are balanced out immediately and zeroed out by the solutions to your problems, you've made shitty problems. You've just written poor character development. It's not interesting. It looks good, but it's hollow. It's shallow. It's a little lazy. Conceptually, let's do one more cheat code while I'm thinking about it. A big one. Immortality. Nothing in that character makes them relatable anymore. not there. You would have to go to such extremes to demonstrate that there's still some level of humanity in them. That's why, for instance, in the Highlander movie franchise, everybody's usually just becoming immortal or has only been immortal for, say, 200 to 400 years before they get their head chopped off. Because you can still sort of grasp some function of humanity there and still relate it to other people who are not immortal. But if you have a character who's existed for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, since the dawn of time, why on earth do you think that character would be relatable to a human being who has a very short lifespan? And why do you think a character who has existed for tens of thousands of years would give a shit about a person? Houseflies live 3 days. Comparatively to a housefly, a human being lives forever. So if your supernatural, mega crazy, wild creature lives forever, do you think they're going to care about the housefly that is the human, let alone the human that, you know, suddenly, somehow, for some reason they're in love with? I'm talking to you, supernatural romance writers. You've got to remember your reader is trying to relate to all the characters you craft, not just the human ones. And while it might be really nice and funny and good for you for being visually creative that you've made a character who can turn into anything, and yeah, you really think you solved everything by giving it a cost or some kind of constraint, if you're not actively doing more with it, if you're not making it more integral to the character and adding more stuff to the character than that, you're basically just swimming in a circle. You're treading water. You're not developing anything new. You're not pushing yourself or your craft. You're just kind of taking up word space on the page. And you could do so much better if you were willing to stop hiding behind the cheat codes. It would be more work. You'd have to do some, there'd be some effort, but you should be capable of doing this. So are cheat codes good and bad? In theory, they're great. They can give you really interesting, really intensely powerful characters, but in most executions, they can go bad very, very quickly. They got a really small sweet spot to hit. They're great for comic books where the stakes are exaggerated and the power scale for everybody is varied and different. But the minute they come into full prose fiction, well, things kind of go a little bit awry. Good question. Oh my God, it's another cheat code I forgot. Question 3, is there a good way to write telepathy? Kinda? Can kinda be an answer? I think kinda is an answer here. So telepathy, the ability to speak essentially through thoughts, to broadcast thoughts and receive them from others. What that can do, if it functions similar to dialogue, can be treated just like dialogue without issue, without ill consequence, without a problem. Maybe you italicize it all. Just make sure you're not italicizing entire pages of text. But so long as you make it clear that, these conversations occur in our minds, and then they're framed probably just as dialogue would be the easiest formatting choice. You could get away with telepathy and have it be functionally workable as a somewhat substitute for dialogue. The problem comes in when you've got a character who can do both. They're telepathic over here when it suits them. They're verbal over there when it suits them. Sometimes they do both simultaneously. If you're going to do something like telepathy, you're going to need two things. One, a set of rules for how it works, including the boundaries and the limits. Like, I have to be able to see the person, or I have to know them, or they have to be within 10 feet of me. You got to have some kind of constraint, because that's going to give the character something to do that they have to try to work to overcome, and it's going to keep your reader, who likely does not have telepathic powers of their own, it's going to keep them engaged. It matters. And two, don't use it to the exclusion of all the other character elements. Telepathy, in particular, is not a panacea. It does not cure all ills. It's just a method of broadcast and reception. Being telepathic does not mean you'll be able to, escape the fire-breathing dragon. Be very careful with your supernatural, paranormal, mega-powered abilities or skills you give a character, because you are risking character relatability and challenge for the character over the course of the story the longer and more consistently they use that power. Tread lightly. And now we're here. Are there any questions from anybody in any chat? Zoom? Twitch? Anybody? Questions? About literally anything. Yes? No? We good? All right. If you think of anything, holler, and I will be happy to answer. Okay. On we go, though. Question 4. In needs theory, we're going to talk about it in a second. In needs theory, should every need be met by the end of the story? Needs theory is a style of character development. Hang on, there's a question in chat, and then we'll come back to needs theory. The difference between a short story and a novel is the amount of scenes. Kinda. Two things. It's going to be the number of words. Short stories are short. Novels are longer. And because it's the number of words, it's also going to usually be the number of scenes, though not always. Usually it's word count. Short stories have fewer words in which to tell a complete story. Novels have more words to tell a complete story. Novels are generally bigger and have more stuff going on, generally. Number of scenes is sometimes a metric. It's sometimes a thing, but you can have a short story and a novel have the same number of scenes. Or in theory, you could have a short story with more scenes than a novel if you're only in them very quickly. It's more about word count. Good question, though. Shall I go back to needs theory? Needs theory is a method for making characters. It's not a perfect strategy. There are no perfect strategies. We talked about that before. But it can be, for some people, a very useful way for figuring out how to position a character within a story. It basically says a character, whomever they might be, has certain needs. They have what's called a critical need. That's the big thing that's driving them on like a human existence level, or on a personal, deep, like interior to the core of them. And it's usually something conceptual, like they just want to be loved, or they want to figure out where they belong. And it's a critical need that usually speaks to a whole series or over one book if it's just one book. It's the deepest, most personal level, and it's often broadly explored across the text. From a critical need, they have what's called active needs. Active needs are more stuff they need, not right this second, but in general over the course of the story. This usually includes the main plot. We need to figure out who kidnapped the girl. We need to figure out who robbed the bank. We need to figure out whether or not I'm in love with this person. Those are the more immediate needs. Then you get situational needs. Situational needs are needs of the moment. Like, in this scene, I've just broken my arm. Situationally, I need medical attention. Or I'm hungry, I need to eat. Or I need to go, follow that car or something. The needs are broken up by urgency and scale. Urgency being, oh my God, if I don't resolve this need right away, something bad will happen to me. I could die. The story could come to a screeching halt. The world could come to an end. Like some level of oh no exists when it comes to the urgency of meeting a need. And the other one is scale, how big a need it is, how important it is to the character, and also sometimes how big that need is to the overall flow of the story. A character who's desperately searching for found family, who's desperate to be loved. If the plot of the story is they're trying to win a big race, they're trying to do a plot that is not immediately connected to their having a found family, then although it is a deeply personal, critical need, it's not really explored in the main plot. It's sort of the big over character arc. And that's fine, but the more central the need is to the person, and less so the plot, but more so to the person individually, those are the needs you need to meet by the end of the story. You're going to meet your character needs first, unless you're setting up a series. That's sort of the wrinkle here. Where could I learn more about needs theory? This was John Gardner, Gardner. If you search for John Gardner Art of Fiction or John Gardner Fiction, not like the Bond books he wrote, but like the how-to writer's guides books that he put out, he covers some needs theory. He did a couple. I can only think of the Art of Fiction off the top of my head because I just referenced it on Monday. But he did a couple. Alexander Drake? Alexander Maxwell? It's either Alexander or Maxwell Drake. I'm mushing all of those things together. He also covers needs theory. And I believe it's the fantasy fiction formula, or the fiction fantasy formula, also covers needs theory. It's a blue book with like a potion and some alchemical stuff on the cover. Those things are where I most recently learned about needs theory. Needs theory is also tangentially mentioned inside Sean Coyne's story grid, like a little. And it shows up in How to Write I think it's Ivanovich's How to Write a Damn Good Novel, which I'm not sure is in print anymore. It's a very 80s book. Like it's got, like, my copy has like a flamingo on it. It's got a very like 80s neon Miami Vice kind of vibe. But that's where I learned about needs theory outside of like academic texts on narrative design. There's a couple great Swedish and Finnish textbooks on narrative design. If you go on Amazon and go look for textbooks on narrative design, they will cover needs theory. It's a somewhat useful tool. It's not really super popular anymore, probably because it's just a little clunky. Like, it requires taking a lot of notes, laying out a lot of pieces and all that stuff. So people have dropped it sort of in favor of like faster. That's not the right word, but less immediately complex strategy. But needs theory is good. Needs theory works. But should every need be met by the end of the story? No. Especially if you're doing a series. Because you want to leave some needs sort of partially resolved so they can be resolved later. But at the same time, some needs require a series. Like, oh my God, we have to go collect the magic MacGuffin so that we can defeat the monster. If each book is a MacGuffin, then that need of defeating the monster is going to take a while. So you don't want to meet every need by the end of the book, but you want to meet some. And depending on how many you have, that might be most. Now, if this is a single book, not a series, it would really super duper help to either meet every need or very strongly and very clearly imply that should the book continue, even though you're done and you've closed it, that should the book go for another 10 pages, you'd have all the needs met. The implication is there. That's usually the best way to go. Great question. I haven't talked about needs theory. I don't think I've ever talked about needs theory in a stream. I know I've covered it in some coaching sessions, but I don't think I've ever talked about it in this. So I'm grateful for that opportunity. Thank you for your question. Okay, I have to tell you a little story about question number 5, and it's not my fault. Question 5 is one I've had this question on the plate for 4 months. Yeah. 4 months. Let's see, it's January now, right? So December, November, October. Yeah, I got this question in late September. And yeah, I've been putting it off. I've been putting it off because I was really afraid that my answer was going to be really too simple. Like I'd say the one sentence answer and then we'd immediately move on to the next question. And I always felt like that's kind of giving the shaft to the person who asked the question. Because the short answer of how do I add a character into a love triangle, the short answer is you just write the character into the love triangle. But that's also somewhat dismissive in its simplicity. So I want to try and take a couple minutes here to sort of like explain how to do it. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the way I'm interpreting this question, because this is the question verbatim out of my inbox. Maybe I'm interpreting the question or I don't have all the details, but I'm assuming based on this question that there already is a love triangle and we are adding now a fourth person to create new relationship geometry. So if we're adding a person to a triangle, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a ninth, whatever, and we're creating polycules and thruples and all different interpretations of things, how do we add them? Okay, what are the two things we need in order to add any offshoots in a relationship geometry? One, the character you are adding has to have a relationship with the deciding character. The deciding character, if you're not a person on the Patreon, you've probably never heard me talk about love triangles at length. So in a love triangle, there is a character called the deciding character or the character with a choice or the choosing character. It's all the same thing. They're usually the protagonist. They're usually the character in the story who has to pick make the choice from the options. In a hetero rom-com, it's the woman who has to pick between the two guys, or it's the guy who has to pick between the two girls. That's the character. That's the choosing character or the deciding character. Any character that you want to bring into this geometry, regardless of their gender, regardless of their identity, regardless of any other factor, they have to have some kind of relationship with the character who's got to make the choice. They have to have a reason to be there. Whether or not that's unrequited or, they're the best friend who's stuck in the, the friend zone, or they're, the third person, they went on one different date every day of the week and they're number 4. Like, they've got to have some reason to have a relationship with the character who has to make the choice. And that relationship, that opportunity for them has to be different than the other opportunities everybody else got, because otherwise they don't feel as distinct. Every person in a triangle has a relationship with each other that is different from other people's relationships with each other. So if I'm the choosing character, my relationship to A is different than my relationship to B. And now here comes C, the character we're adding. My relationship to C is different than B and different than A. It might all have the same sort of broad brushstrokes, like, oh, we're all in some sort of intimate romantic relationship, but the specifics are different. I'm me. That person is a lawyer. That person is a journalist. That person is a seamstress. I'm just picking things. But there's always some kind of dynamic between everybody involved. That's the first thing we need. Because without that relationship to the choosing character, how are they supposed to be a choice in the triangle? How do they add tension to the triangle? The next thing they need, because it's a full triangle or whatever shape we're drawing, square, hexagon, septagon, octagon, nonagon, whatever. crazy star fractal shape, whatever. They have to have a relationship or a reason to have a relationship with the other characters. So here comes C. We're adding C. So if we're adding C, C needs a relationship with B, and C needs a relationship with A. I don't mean dating. They just need to have some kind of reason to connect with each other or compete with one another or interact with each other. In most hetero romances, it's a competitive relationship because everybody's vying for the choosing character. And it turns into that sort of weird romantic arms race of anything you can do, I can do better, which is supposed to flatter the choosing character somehow. It's kind of gross and really strangely really strictly binary and tropish. I don't like it at all. But if we're adding extra characters, we don't really want to perpetuate that. So we want to make sure these relationships between C to A and C to B and B to A and A to C, each of these are distinct. It's not just a different version of the same reason. Oh, you're competing with him. Well, I'm competing with him. Well, let's do something better than just competing. We've already ticked the competing box. What else you got? Once you establish those two things, a connection to the chooser and some kind of dynamic with the others, you just need to involve them as though they were in there. Just create situations for the two characters to interact. Roll them into the story. How do they interact? When do they interact? Give that relationship between A and C, where's my camera? C, the other person, give that movement through the story. Give it an arc. How does it succeed? How does it fail? How is it tested? Oh, man, it disconnected. All right, so we're going to pause for a second. There we go. We're back. Except I'm partially muted. All right, we're back. Random and weird. I apologize for that. I'm going to turn the captions back on. It's so frustrating. Nope. That's not the right button, Sean. Sorry, guys. Hang on one second. I'm having a moment. Oh, there we go. We're back. Okay. Random and weird. Anyway, so where did I leave off? Right. Connections and relationships. Make sure everybody can connect to each other. Make sure everybody is distinct from each other. And it will work out just fine. Now, as for, there is one thing called lateness that you probably should know about. Lateness is the idea that how late into a story you bring in other characters sort of compresses the amount of time they can interact. Like, generally, for a love triangle, for a love rectangle, for a love insert shape name here, you want to try and introduce all those characters near the first half of the book. You don't want to have anybody sort of randomly newly introduced in the back half of the book. It'll feel unfair. Now, some subversions of this include like, my first partner left me, so now I'm in a love triangle with these other people. And then as the plot sort of twists, we bring back the first partner, which is legit, and you can do that, but that's usually the most common subversion of this thing. But lateness says, hey, the later you bring a character in, they've got less space to have as much of an arc as everybody else, and it can feel either really forced or really convenient if that character ends up being the chosen character. And it also dismisses all the other characters that you spent more time with. But in general, love triangles are all about relationship dynamics. Map out each one individually as though it's only those two characters, A to B, A to C, all the way through, however many characters you have. This group, this group, this group. And treat it, at least when you're mapping it, at least when you're outlining it, treating it as though this is just what the story is, and then take each constructed pair and figure out how to weave it into at least one other situational pair. What does that mean? So if A is with B, how do we bring some kind of tension? Not necessarily have C or something or D walk into the room. I mean, that's a little obvious and possible, but it doesn't have to be that. It can just be the fact that it's, something that D mentioned is coming up now as A is with B. It doesn't always have to be the person's like right there. Oh my God, you're here. You don't need it to be so obvious. I mean, if you're writing something obvious, like a farce or something, then sure, it does. But if otherwise, it can just be some kind of like reminder or clue in for the reader that, hey, there are these other people and these other choices floating out in the ether of this story. Does that make sense? That's how you add a character into a love triangle. And I realize now that my camera headroom is like massive. So there we go. That's better. Now it doesn't feel like I'm in some kind of weird cave. Okay. Hi. How are you guys? Everybody good? We're all right? We're moving along? Now my camera's too low. I feel like everybody's staring at me. Okay. I'll deal with that in a minute. No, we can do better than that. There we go. Gentle advice. What do I do when I disagree with my editor? Okay. We're going to go full screen for this. Hey, look, it's full screen. Okay. It's weird lighting. I know there's a strange filter. It's a thing. Look, you are going to disagree with your editor. Your editor, even if it's me, isn't perfect and isn't always right. You are not always right either. But the idea is that you, or me and you, or whomever, you and your editor, are working together towards the same goal. You're going to have to both compromise. You're going to have to both work a little bit together. You can propose a thing. They can say no. They can propose a thing. You can say no. It's all right. In the end, every editorial note is still a suggestion. So if there's something you don't, thank you. In the end, if you don't agree with a thing, you don't have to act on it. Now, it might be worth examining why you don't like it. You know, do you bristle at this thing because they're pointing out a thing that's really personal to you? Like they're telling you, hey, that's not how commas work, and you just love hitting the comma. I don't know. Maybe you need to examine that. Maybe you want to talk about that. Maybe you need to think about that. Maybe there's some work there to be done. But all the same, you can disagree with your editor. It's totally fine. The situation you want to avoid, though, as I come back out of full screen, the situation you want to avoid, though, is completely blowing off your editor. So editing is hard work, like hella hard work. And it takes a lot of time. I'm in the middle of 2 big edits. It's taken me, like 15, 16 days. Certainly longer than I thought because I got a lot to say with these books. And it's not like I'm doing it in an hour or 2. These are hundreds of pages, hundreds of thousands of words. It's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-hour days. There's a lot to it. You're going line by line. You're leaving comments. You're leaving notes. You're working on the grammar. You're asking questions about the big picture as you go through everything. If you've ever gotten notes back from an editor, you know what I'm talking about. This is not a real, just I kind of slapped it out kind of vibe. And for a lot of writers, that can be really overwhelming. Oh my God, look at all the red on my screen. Oh my God, look at all the highlights. Look at all the notes. Oh my God, I must suck at this. That is a completely expected and known response writers have. Some editors wield that somewhat aggressively. I will break their spirit. Some editors just kind of leave it as is. Some editors kind of soften the blow and kind of increase the amount of comments over time. Every editor has a different approach to it, but in the end, they all know writers will freak out if they've ever had a lot of comments or never had any, and all of a sudden they're getting some. But just because you're getting feedback, comments, positive, negative, or whatever, doesn't mean you have to act on it. I know there's a growing trend and a common idea that when you get feedback from your editor, you expect some certain percentage of it to be automatically positive, as if that's going to offset the negatives. Example, you have 24 issues of run-on sentences with vague pronouns, so the reader's not going to be able to tell what or who you're talking about. But when that one paragraph is written really well, you need that paragraph to be highlighted. Hey, good job here. Now, here comes a John opinion section, don't always do that. Maybe I should. I'm in therapy. Maybe this should be a thing I talk about, come Friday. But all the same, every editor has a different school of thought. Every editor has a different approach for this stuff, which is why it's really important that prior to engaging an editor, rather than having them sort of come meet you through your work, ooh, could you do sample pages? I want to see if we'll vibe. No, I know this is gentle advice, and the design of gentle advice is not to swear, but fuck you if that's what you've done. Because the best approach for getting to know an editor and seeing if you can vibe with them is having a conversation with them outside the structure of your book. Like an email, or more specifically, an actual vocal conversation. It just goes a lot easier. Because then you can talk to them and immediately go like, okay, this is somebody I can listen to. This is somebody who knows what they're doing. This is somebody who I think I can work well with, rather than meeting them through the medium of my work, kind of getting free work out of them and exploiting their expertise, but also using it as a shield to hide behind because I don't want my feelings hurt. This is a contact sport. This is contact creativity. I'm not saying everybody's out to ruin you or hurt you or upset you, but you also can't run through this whole experience wrapped in bubble wrap. You're going to get feedback you don't like. You're going to get feedback you don't agree with. Sometimes that's feedback you need to hear even if you don't like it, because it will actively lead to a better thing down the road. And other times it's just, yeah, I don't agree with you, and then you leave it alone and move on. So when you disagree with your editor, and how do I say this? If you disagree with your editor, but they're making a good point, you probably want to act on their experience and expertise. If you disagree with their editor and ultimately it doesn't seem to make a difference, it's just kind of like, no, we have two different views on this thing, then you don't have to act on their stuff. And it'll be just fine. It's not the end of the world. Do you know how many people disagree with me on like a client by client, meeting by meeting basis? The number of people I sit there and I walk them through their stuff, and they're like, no, we're leaving that alone. Okay. When I was newer at this, when I was younger at this, when it was like my first couple of years in, somebody would be like, no, I'm not doing that. And I would fly off the handle. Holy shit, I would fly way off the handle. What do you mean? You got to do it. I'd just lose my fucking mind. And then, like, I reached a point where it wasn't worth trying to convince somebody that I was way more correct than they were about a character arc. Because 7 comments later, we're talking about the same character arc, and we both collaborate to come up with a totally different approach to it. It's okay to disagree. And it's okay to disagree and not act on it. The problem comes in when you disagree and you dig your heels in and you feel attacked. Because you're not being attacked. Your work is being worked on. You know, if you tank your car, right? Like you bang up your car real good or it breaks down, and you take your car to a garage and then the mechanic, puts it up on the lift and starts doing car things to it. Even if you bounced your car off the side of a cliff, the mechanic, when they're talking about, oh, well, there's a lot of damage, there's this busted, this thing, this needs replacement, that needs replacement, they're not saying, hey, you're a terrible driver, you really fucked this car up. You might be interpreting their feedback that way, but that's because you're feeling kind of guilty about bouncing your car off that mountain. You don't want to project your emotional template onto their commentary, because this is just work. The plumber isn't mad at you for clogging the sink. The plumber is just here to help you have the sink run better. The editor's not mad that you said no and didn't approve all the edits automatically blindly. The editor is just here to help you craft your best work. Make sense? And now, are there any more questions from chat? It's also the top of the hour because the heat has kicked over and it's getting cold in here. So I might, like, while I'm off camera, grab my sweatshirt for a second. Any questions, though? The tea's okay tonight. It's not bad. How do you get over the fear of starting to write? Like, your outline is done, but how do you make that transition to putting words on the page is what you're asking about? Okay. No, that's really good. Okay. All right. Let me hang on. Let me I'm not going to go full screen on this. I just want to lean forward and talk to you, and I will speak in soothing tones. Think about for a second what it is you're afraid of. Is this a fear of getting it wrong? Is this a fear of messing it all up? Is this a fear of starting and then stalling out? What exactly is the fear? Because if it has anything to do with whether or not you're going to do this wrong, it's a fear of messing it up and stalling it out. Oh, look, man, I applaud your courage and bravery to say that. That's a big deal admission. Good job. Have air horns. But by and large, let's talk about this for a minute. It's your draft, right? It's your book. You're the one doing the writing. How could you possibly mess it up? It's your thing. You're in charge of it. You can always make another draft. You can always rewrite some part of it. And just because you wrote I'll make numbers up. Let's say you wrote page 1 and you hate it. Well, you could rewrite page 1, or you could wait until you're done writing the whole thing and then go back and rewrite page 1. It's your thing. You're the only person who can't mess it up. Somebody else can come along and start giving you feedback that kind of steers you in a wrong direction. And even if you have an outline, even if you don't have an outline, you can't really mess it up because you're the one doing the writing. It's okay if sometimes you deviate from your outline. I know that's hang on. You can deviate from your outline. It's really okay. The outline's there to guide you overall, but if while you're in the process of typing it out, writing whatever you're writing, you get into that zone where you're feeling really creative and you come up with a better idea than what's on your outline, go do the better idea. Just because you wrote down the outline, first of all, no one's coming to check the outline. This isn't elementary school. We're not coming to yell at you. So you can't mess it up. You're the one in charge. There's a joke in screenwriting that when a writer is also the director of the movie and they're in their own scene or they're giving some kind of notes, if the notes they're giving deviate from what's in the script, all of a sudden the writer director goes, well, I'm also the writer. These are rewrites on the fly. You're in charge of the story. You can't mess it up. And even if you're wondering, like, well, but I could write a thing that nobody likes. You just started writing it. The question was, how do I get over the fear of starting to write? And you're talking about nobody liking it like it's done already. You just started. You know, this is the bread example we talk about. You're freaking out about whether or not your flour and eggs and yeast in the bowl is going to turn out to be a loaf of bread nobody eats on Thanksgiving. It's just some eggs and yeast and flour in a bowl, man. You're worrying about step 22 and you're on step 1. You can't mess this up. It's your thing. Now, let's go address the second one, stalling out. Stalling out could happen, but you have an outline. Because one of the major reasons why stalling out occurs is that people haven't outlined. They haven't thought about what comes next. They haven't thought about how pieces click together. This to this to this to this to this. So they stall out. They get stuck because they end up in this space of, I don't know what happens. Well, that's what you have an outline for. But let's say you're not stalling out because of the outline. Let's say you're stalling out because of the boredom. Let's say you're writing it and you're like, oh, this sucks. I hate it. And then you get distracted with like 10 million other things, either by choice or just by circumstance. Well, then you stall out. The problem isn't that you stall out. That's fine. You can stall out. The problem is whether or not you come back. So you stalled out. All right, cool, sure. Did you come back? Because if you stall out and don't come back, you didn't stall out, you quit. Which is a thing, and you can be afraid of it if you want, but it's also your option to quit. You could always walk away. Who's going to be mad at you? Just you. But if you stall out, go back to your outline. Or if you stall out, figure out why you're frustrated about the thing you're making. Do you need to, like, roll back a couple paragraphs and try it from a different direction? Do you need to add a scene that's maybe not on the outline? Do you need to, write something badly and make a note, hey, I'm going to fix this in the next draft? Like, what is it that's going to cause you to stall? You won't know that until you get there. What you're doing now is anticipating a stall. We haven't even started, and you're talking about what happens when you run out of steam. Well, you just started. Don't set yourself up for rejection before you even get going. We have an outline. You can always reconfigure it. You can always add something in, and you can always take a break and come back. So if you do stall out, then you come back. But if you go into the start of something, planning and expecting and anticipating, or even in some cases organizing your way towards stalling out, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you're better than that. You don't need that. I mean, it happens. I get it. But at the same time, it's fixable. You have your outline. You can figure out a new way to write a thing, or you can take a break. It's okay. Great question, though. Love that question. Are there any others? You're welcome. You're very welcome. Any others? I feel like I'm over here. Have there been any? Yes? No? We're good? We're keeping going? All right, then let us keep going. I pressed the wrong thing. Hang on. There we go. Question 7. How do I know when or if I have too many red herrings in my plot? Can I believe that next week is February already? I hadn't really thought about it. I mean, yeah, it is February, and yeah, I guess. I guess it seems pretty quick. This month has kind of moved by, but it's okay. Being February is good because that means we're closer to like the warm months when the sun comes back and the planet isn't full of despair. So I'm okay with it being February next week. That's going to be pretty great for me. Good question. I really don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I'm going to sneeze. I never know what streamers do, whether or not they just sneeze. Question 7. How do I know when or if I have too many red herrings in my plot? I swear I thought discussing February was actually a red herring. Yeah, it seems very herringy? Herringus-ish? It seems fishy. That's a double pun. How's that? So how do I know when I have too many? Because an abundance of red herrings, we know what a red herring is, right? It's a detour in the plot to cause the reader to pay attention to a point you control rather than the actual point. It's a disguise, right? We all think Kevin did, or we all think Ted did it, but really it was Kevin. How do I know when I have too many red herrings in my plot? When you kind of lose track of the forward progress in your plot. When you create the opportunity to have like 5 detours and we spend time like... It is not a Pikachu shirt. It is a Four Seasons Total Landscaping shirt. I don't own any Pokemon stuff. No, that's not true. I have one pair of socks that have Pokeballs on them. They are small and red, and I don't even think they fit me anymore. Although maybe they might. I lost a lot of weight. I hadn't really thought about that. But no, it's a Four Seasons Total Landscaping in Philadelphia t-shirt. Because landscaping is anti-fascist. I'm going back to red herrings, though. Red herrings in a plot. A lot of people, particularly writers who are trying too hard to be clever or trying to feel like they need to do them, because you don't need to make red herrings. They are options. But just because they're options, some writers feel like, oh shit, I got to have like a ton of them. You don't. But as you start to create so many, that exploring them and developing them takes us farther and farther away from the main plot. Like we've gone way off road. You ever been driving somewhere and like, you know, you've got to get back on the main highway, but in order to get back on the main highway, you feel like you've been driving 10 minutes in a completely perpendicular direction? Or you know where your subway stop is, but in order to get back there, because you didn't get off in time, you got to go down like 3 stops, then hop across the platform, and then take on a different train and go down 2, and you're kind of like making this big, weird square. And you've gone way out of your way when it was just easier for you to get off the damn subway and walk up a block on foot. Just me? Okay, maybe that's just a me thing then. So the more red herrings you have, after a while, you reach what's called the point of saturation, which is the idea that there's just too many things for the reader to kind of figure out, and you've sort of like buried them under this blanket of just stuff they have to figure out whether or not it's important. You've given them too many details. So how do you know where that point is? There's no magic number. There's no magic formula. Some people are okay writing a story that has 2 herrings. Some people have a thing with 3. Some people 4. Some of the old classic writers had like 9. Everybody is going to get a different number because it's based on your writing style and your voice, more so than the specific structure of what it is you're writing. They're not limited by genre. It's how you write that tells you how many herrings you can and cannot hold. But the more you detour away from moving the plot forward, that's where you know you have too many. My advice to most people who want to start getting into red herrings and adding red herrings, keep the number low and spend more time with each individual one rather than have like a ton of them and barely spend time with any. Deeper rather than broader, if that makes sense. It's a good question. It's a really good question. On to question 8. I think my story is in the wrong tense. How can I be sure? I like this question. I got to tell you, initially when I was making this list, I was ready to kind of just, this question. But it's grown on me because I have an answer for you. You know your thing is in the wrong tense when 2 situations occur. First situation. When you are reading your stuff aloud, to make sure it sounds okay, and you find yourself, or you read it to catch up after like the next day, or you just kind of read it to yourself to kind of see what's going on. If you're reading it to yourself and you find yourself verbalizing it into a different tense, This is very frequent when you're writing in present tense and you say it out loud in past tense. That is an indicator that your story has the potential to be in past tense. And it might be worth exploring. That's the first way. That's usually the common way. Let's give you an uncommon one just to give your toolbox a few more tools on this. Other thing. In the course of writing, particularly an action beat or when things pick up in intensity and it's not just people sitting and talking, but the minute the story starts going, the minute we start doing stuff, if you find yourself frequently framing the action in the other tense, whether that's past for present or present for past, the minute you start developing, that's the word I'm looking for, developing that action in a different tense, it's another signal that, hey, this story would probably flow better in a different tense. This week has, for me, really seemed to be an occasion where I've met a lot of writers writing in different tenses, writing with different POVs. And I've heard from almost all of them some variation of the idea of, I have to write this story in this tense and in this POV because it's how I want to do it. And that's fine. And that's a great reason to write in whatever, a style, a voice, a structure, a genre, whatever. It's because it's what you want to do. Wonderful. But there's more to it than that. It's not just like a, circle the option at the top of the page and then you're good to go kind of thing. Because some story constructions, some of the stuff that you have in your story, some of the arcs you have in your story, some of the themes you're presenting in your story, some of the overall just building and development of your story is going to lend itself to one kind of construction over another. Not making it utterly impossible to do, but certainly making it so difficult that especially if you're new, you're going to really struggle. And when it comes time to get it edited, when it comes time to get like full-on pro feedback, you're going to get a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance and a lot of comments about like, hey, why is it in this person? Why are there these POVs? Why is it in this tense? It's not bad or wrong to do it in the tense that you see everybody else doing it in, like there's a reason why a lot of stories are in past tense. That doesn't mean like past tense is just so dull. It's not dull. That has nothing to do with dullness. It's just, it's a great vehicle for lots of different story constructions. The same is true with MPOV. If you're looking for a great video on MPOV, jump on over to the YouTube channel, look for how do I write this multiple points of view. It's the one with the chessboard and the head and the graphic. It's all right, though, that what you have is in what is generally an experimental vein. Just understand, though, that how you want to write a thing and what you want to write can often conflict. And it can be difficult to say what you want to say in the way you're trying to say everything else. And one of those two things probably needs to change. And if you find yourself making all these changes one after the other, like you keep trying to write scenes 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23, and you just keep putting it in past tense, and you almost seem to default to it without even really thinking it through, that's a subconscious signal that you should be writing in the past tense. There is no, hang on, we're going full screen for this. I want to be real. Come here, right here. Look. There is no genre. Where's my camera so I don't block it with my hum? There's no genre. There's no tense. There's no POV. That is so integral to any human being storytelling structure that you have to go out of your way to make it really hard to do the thing you want to do. That's just asinine. You can tell any story in practically any way. Some ways are going to be way easier than others, and some ways are going to be much more of an uphill battle. There are very few impossible combinations of tense point of view and structure. Like the really hard ones, like the real difficult swings, would be like MPOV second person's probably the hardest thing in the world to write. If not MPOV second, then probably first person omniscient, which is so old we don't even teach it anymore. If not that, then I'm trying to think of what the other difficult ones are. Second person fluid present, where you don't have a consistent chronology and it's just sort of stream of consciousness. That became absurdist writing in the 60s. We did a lot of drugs back then, you guys. Humans were weird. But yeah, I think the big difficult swings are like second person MPOV, and that's only because the reader won't know who the hell to pay attention to. Because the you will always change, and the reader won't be able to develop any context long enough. So you can do it. You've got to reduce the number of characters. You'd have to simplify the plot. You'd have to spend more time in each character's head so they feel distinct. And for some people, that's doable. But for a lot of people, that's just too much goddamn work to recontextualize a very active story. Likewise, first-person omniscient is just a deity writing about its creations. And it's very hard to induce challenge in an omniscient present narrator. You just... It's that old theological discussion of can a deity make a rock it can't lift? Can you present a challenge to a character who knows everything? Those are, I mean, they're doable. They're experimental on some degree, but they're doable. Do I like them? No. They're not my jam. I can work with them. I can steer you through them. I can tell you to avoid them if you need to. But there's a reason why they are the rarity. They're the reason why they're the far end of the bell curve and why they're the really small percentage of story. That's not because, everybody's just too stupid except you to do it. It's more just like, that's really hard, you guys. Why would you do that? You're making it harder for yourself. You're going to tie your shoelaces together and then climb Everest. You don't have to. Climbing Everest is enough. Why go out of your way to make it harder for you? That's a thing. So if you're thinking your story is in your wrong tense, I'm going to tell you right now, if you're even having that thought, it's probably worth exploring the difference. Here's another narrative design question. Is it possible, question number 9, is it possible to do a whole series entirely using branching narratives? I need tea. I need tea because I'm going to end up cursing in this. Ugh. Okay. Is it possible? Yes. There's your answer. If you don't know what a branching curiosity, what kind of tea is it? This is passion fruit. It's Danish. I do not remember the company. I got it online. It's okay. Like, I made this hella strong. Like, this is like 11 tea bags into like filtered water strong. Because when I had it initially, this is also iced. Because when I had it initially warm, it was just kind of like brown water. But you make it strong enough and it's just fine. There's a honey vanilla root beer waiting for me downstairs. There's also a caramel root beer waiting downstairs and a fire roasted grape soda for my possible pleasure. I don't know which one I'll have. We'll see. Good question, though. Thank you for asking about tea. I should probably put merch out that has tea on it. Anyway, branching narrative, if you don't know what that is, remember the Choose Your Own Adventure novels as a kid? If you're real young, Google it. It's basically a set of stories where instead of moving linearly from page to page to page, at the bottom of every page, it is a good idea about the merch. I'm going to make myself a note in a minute. At the bottom of every page, it says, if you do this, if your character goes this way, if your character goes that way, turn to this page. If your character goes to the left, turn to page 15. If your character goes right, turn to page 65. And so it constantly hops through all these different turns and branches because it's always what's called option ending situations. Because it leaves the agency of the character up to the reader's decision-making process. Because Choose Your Own Adventure are written in second person. Because you are the person who's supposed to be going on this adventure. I loved the Choose Your Own Adventure books as a kid. There was a bookstore I would go to when I was a little boy on the Jersey Shore. There was a bookstore that I was allowed to walk to by myself. This was like the mid 80s, early 90s, and I was allowed to take a few dollars and like clutch it tight in my fist. But I could take a few dollars and walk down like the 2 blocks to this little bookstore where they would let you in if you had sandy feet. I always thought that was like the coolest thing ever. You could just come in off the beach, buy a book, and then walk back to the beach with it. So I would buy 2 Choose Your Own Adventure books and like an Italian Ice or like a Nutty Buddy or a King Cone or a Cornetto. They're all the same thing. Or a Choco Taco, which I think is pretty telling if you know my dating history. But I could buy an ice cream and 2 books with the money my mom would give me. Choco Taco. Totally worth it. Big fan of the taco, you know what I'm saying? So I'd buy a Choco Taco. I'd buy 2 books and I'd be able to sit back on the beach for another couple hours and sit under the umbrella and just read. And I was very happy. And it was one time when my dad, if I was reading and I had ice cream, my dad wouldn't yell at me. It was a pretty great time. So Choose Your Own Adventure were really like a big narrative thing for me. I've been thinking about like doing something, maybe a whole like stream about it or something. I don't know. But branching narrative is Choose Your Own Adventure. There are other kinds, but that's the biggie in the field. And you can tell a whole series that way of connected stories doing all this stuff, except you run into what's called a linkage problem. Linkage is the stuff that carries from book to book to book. So in what's called a linear series, like a regular series, the stuff that happens in book 1 and the stuff a character gains in book 1, like tools or powers or doodads or gadgets or whatever, generally carry forward, and the consequences carry forward unless you're writing what's called a reset series, which is every book is self-contained, but it always involves the same characters. Linkage is the idea of, well, in the first book, we totally got like the flying car and the bulletproof vest and like the parachute made out of candy canes. And that linkage means we got to carry that stuff into the second book. With a branching narrative, it is possible to navigate the story to a satisfying conclusion, but not one that gains the optimum story. Like you can go through a Choose Your Own Adventure novel successfully, but miss out on critical things. The linkage problem, it's a type of problem, but the linkage is, well, if you're supposed to go through the first book and find, let's say, the magic sword, just for the sake of example, right? If you finish the first book and don't find the magic sword, but you need it in the second book, what do you do? That's the linkage problem. Because each book in a branching narrative, each big thing assumes best result from the previous thing. So you totally got 100% completion, perfect pass through, totally found all the bells and whistles in book 1, and then you start book 2. Usually the way around this is to reset everything so that the stuff from book to book does not carry with you. You might have to go through a situation where you have to explain like, well, why don't you have your shit from the last book? And it might get a little contrived or a little forced, but all the same, you can still figure out like a way around that. There's still a way to skin that cat. But you can do a whole series entirely through branching narratives. You just need to plan the shit out of them. Now, listen to me. Here, we'll go full screen. Look, hang on. I got to move the microphone. If you're writing one, if you're going to do this, I swear to you, I will give you a custom price to help work on this. I would love to do branching narrative series design. So if you want that and you need an editor, you come talk to me. Okay? Good deal. I also now really want a Choco Taco. All right, back to this. Any questions about anything? think I'll have a root beer when I'm done. I do want to thank you. Oh, wait, hang on. Of all the different things I currently do, what is the one that I enjoy the most? Oh, God. Oh, shit. I don't know if I can pick it's a tie. Because they're two very different things, but I love them both the mostest. So, first, like Patreon versus this versus Monday versus working with clients. Oh, shit. Okay. That's a great question. I think it's Patreon is up there. Patreon shares the top spot. If you don't know the Patreon, it's a great question. Oh, God, it's amazing. Patreon shares the top spot with this because I get to talk about stories. If you don't know what I do on Patreon, for $2 a month, every week, you and I watch a movie together. Sometimes it's a very popular movie that's, in theaters. Sometimes it's, a brand new thing that hits streaming. Sometimes it's an old movie. Sometimes it's a TV pilot. But you and I watch something. And over the course of the thing, whatever it is we're talking about, we pause it and we talk about, okay, pause it right here. Pause it at, 15:10 on the clock. And let's talk about what's happening with the characters. Let's talk about the plot. We don't do it to make fun of a thing, even if the movie's hot garbage. Yeah, I will make a couple jokes. Yeah, I will say some funny stuff because it's fun. But by and large, I'm doing it to show you like, hey, here are the tools we talk about on Wednesdays. Here are the tools. Yeah, Hellraiser 2 is the example of the worst thing. It was so bad. And everybody was like, oh, John, you got to do Hellraiser 2. And people love it. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I couldn't. I like the Hellraiser franchise. Hellraiser 2 was awful. But anyway, I sit there and I watch a movie with you and we go through it. And then all of a sudden, like we pause it and break it down. Here's the plot. Here's the character. Here's this. Here's that. In addition to that walkthrough of a film, you also get an introduction where we cover one sort of narrative tool. Like we're going to talk about Siri. Like we just did The Craft, right? The Craft goes out on Friday this week. And the introduction to The Craft is about half an hour long. I talked about age brackets for publication. How do you tell new reader from young adult, new adult from young adult, and early reader, and sort of grading things and how that lines up with movies and stuff. Because you should know how to publish stories and where you sit and how to sort this stuff out. And then once we do that and we watch the movie, we also do about anywhere between 20 minutes and an additional hour talking about like, okay, so we've got all these tools from all these movies we've watched. How would we make the movie we just watched better? How would we rewrite it? If it was our job to remake it, what would we do? Who would we cut? What would we add? What would we change? Not so much to like make it fan servicey, not so much like, I would just make that girl taller. I would make that guy have guns or something. But I would do it in more a matter of like, okay, so what's a better storytelling technique? Patreon I love because I get to watch movies with my friends. It is the best part of my job. It is the best part. Maybe the other would be probably, well, lately it's been the Monday night streams. I think I have been getting progressively better and better every Monday night. And if you didn't check out Every Sentence is a Camera, I think that might be my best ever stream. It is the most clear. It is the most passionate. It is the most detailed 2 hours where I just lay out everything you need to really write more effectively. So I think, and the reason I like the Mondays, I mean, Wednesday nights with you guys are amazing too. It's really hard to pick. But Patreon sits at the top because it's the most open-ended. People vote on what it is we're going to watch, and then I do my homework and talk about it. And then on Monday, I get to yammer into a microphone about whatever the hell I want. And sometimes it's a dud. Sometimes it's so dense and so technical, people just sort of stare at the screen, I imagine. And other times it's really engaging and great, and I'm learning how to do it as I go, and there's a good balance of nervousness and success, which I love. And Wednesday night chat is, or you take tons of notes, which is what everybody did on Monday. Wednesday night is a different animal for me because it's more conversational. It's a little less teachery. It's a little bit more, hey, we're just hanging out. And sometimes it's a bit more quiet, and sometimes we're done by 8:30, and sometimes we're done at 8:45, and sometimes we're done at 9:15. And it's a bit more harder to predict. There's a bit more anticipation and tension in this for me. I want to make sure I do a good job. I want to make sure it's well produced. And the connection issues seem more abundant on Wednesdays than Monday. My clients, I love my clients. All my clients are amazing. Because I know some of you were here. But there are times where the work, like the editing for them, is incredibly slow compared to streaming. 8 hours going over 60 pages of text when it feels like I'm flagging every sentence can really feel very different and very much more exhausting, different kind of exhausting than talking to you guys for 2 hours. Maybe you've noticed I love to talk. You give me a microphone and we'll just go. You put me on an interview, put me on your interviews and podcasts. You put me in an interview and just tell me whether or not I can swear and we're off to the races, no problem. But the editing, the sit down and do the brute force of the work, maybe it's a function of my age, maybe it's a function of my focus, maybe it's a function of just what I've been doing elsewhere. It's the best editing I've ever done, but it feels different now because I'm doing more outgoing, more vocal, more collaborative, more creative things. I would kind of drop editing and client work, although I like talking to clients. I love having conversations. I love pulling that stuff out with people. I would put editing at the bottom of the list, then the client stuff, then the Wednesday chat, then the Monday stream, then the Patreon if I had to rank from bottom to top. What an awesome question. I hope you got it occurs to me though as I say that, I hope you guys don't feel like, you're the least favorite child in the bunch, because you're certainly not. It's just that I'm starting now to really feel like everything I do is different, and it's good and it's invigorating, and I hope the enthusiasm and knowledge combination comes across, and I'm hoping that it continues to take off, because Wednesday night chats are the reason why I don't have to worry about buying cat food anymore. It's pretty fucking rad. There was another question. I got to scroll up. Hang on. What book or play did I read in high school English class that I still look back fondly on? Hamlet. Hamlet in Miss Dixon's junior year English class, 11th grade English. We did Hamlet. And I was Polonius because I was too nervous to ask to be Hamlet. The reason I was too nervous to ask to be Hamlet was because there was a redheaded girl named Margaret who sat 2 seats in front of me, and I had a huge crush on her. And I was so worried. I had a bad stammer as a kid. And I was so worried that in the middle of a Hamlet soliloquy that I would start stammering, and then she would turn around and look at me, and I would have been a mess. I would have run out of the room crying. I was a mess. And that would have wrecked me, because I was already shy as even as a high schooler. I was terribly shy. So, but I remember reading Hamlet, and I really just got it. I got this idea of this guy's going through an existential emotional crisis. I'm going through an existential emotional crisis. I've apparently got to go to college. I don't know what the hell I want to do with my life. This is weird and confusing. I'm supposed to leave home and feel really prepared, and it seems like everybody else is way more prepared than me, and I don't know what I'm going to do, and it feels like my life is radically changing, and I'm totally out of control with it. Hamlet, I totally got. More so than Romeo and Juliet, although Romeo and Juliet was the first time I watched a movie in an English class where they showed boobs. Because we watched, I think it was the early 80s or the late 70s version of the English, an English presentation. And Juliet's topless at one point, and she's very clearly not a teenager or a preteen. But the teacher made copious, profound excuses about hey, she's she's gonna be topless, and I look at it now you can see way more aggressive things in an Instagram thirst trap. But I look back at Hamlet and even Macbeth. We did Macbeth my senior year. But I look back at Hamlet as a moment where I'm like, oh, you have the ability to connect with an audience through story. Okay, this isn't just for comic books and Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. Like, okay. You can move people through theater, and it's not just like this stuffy, everybody's got to wear a tuxedo and be really square. Like, you can have an emotional response to a guy wondering if he should continue to exist. And I'm going to let you in on a secret. I think the idea of having your dad be a ghost was way cooler than what I was experiencing as a kid. I'm sure it's devastating. I'm sure it's horrifying. I'm sure it's very sad for people with healthy relationships. But for me, like, the idea of, like, ghost dad, not the shitty movie, but, like, my dad's a ghost and he's telling me to murder. Like, that just sounds awesome to me. And especially when I was, like, a junior in high school. Hell yeah, let's go, ghost dad. Let's start murdering folks and go hang out with our weird, creepy theater friends. And then fake a play that reveals my truth. Like, it was just, I just really clicked with it. I still do. I go out of my way now to, like, look for different versions of it. The David Tennant Royal Shakespeare one is amazing. Yeah, big fan of Hamlet. Big fan of Hamlet. Great question. Wow, I haven't thought about that in ages. I think everybody, what did I do in high school first? Myths? We did Greek and Roman myths and Norse myths. We did like European myth in freshman year of high school. And I remember we had to make, like, weird presentations. Like, you had to stand there and, like, talk about a myth for 5 minutes. It was really, really random. But then we got into Shakespeare, and we did a Shakespeare play every year thereafter. We did other stuff too, but that was like the big thing. Everybody looked forward to it in the spring. We also did, like, the books everybody does in high school. We did, like, Catcher in the Rye and To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry. Did we do Huckleberry? No, we did Tom Sawyer. We did The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. We did Ivanhoe. And I got in trouble because I mentioned Tristan and Isolde, and the teacher didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. So then I talked about Siegfried, and she definitely didn't know what I was talking. We had, that teacher and I had beef for years. But thank you for bringing it up. I haven't thought about that stuff in ages. I really appreciate that. That nice walk down memory lane. Thank you. Other questions? Other issues? Other things? Else we will march on. What was next? Question 10? Yeah. Nope, that's 9. Question 10. Why don't publishers standardize their submission guidelines? Okay. All right. I have 2 answers. And I'm debating going full screen in this. Let's go full screen in this. Okay. Hang on, I got to move the mic. 2 reasons. First reason. Everybody's going to have slightly different submission guidelines. Some people want it in Times New Roman. Some people want it in Arial or Courier Prime or Calibri. Some people want it in some other font. Some people want their margin set a certain way. Some want 1.5 space. Some want double space. Everybody's different individually, structurally on the page. And it's to facilitate having it read by other people, like editors and interns and all that stuff, right? That's the first reason. Here's the second reason. They don't want to standardize because they want to give you the impression that one of them is better than everybody else and they're all different, even though they're all more or less the same. They're different heads on the same hydra that is slowly consuming everything around it. The reason why, PRH and SNS have vaguely similar but still slightly different submission guidelines is so that you can, see them as different entities, even though, well, now PRH owns damn near everything that isn't Amazon. And the slight variations allow them to be discriminating, meaning gatekeepery. And it's not in their interest to standardize things. It's in their interest to further create walls that you have to climb and hoops you have to jump through. They have no interest in making this easy for you. How else are they going to tell you you're wrong? How else are they going to reject you if you do everything they say? They don't want to make this easy. They don't want you to be aware how simple it can be to produce work. They don't want you to make art because then they have to pay you for it. And they're not in the business of paying you. They're in the business of profiting on you. So if they can craft individual submission guidelines that you have to worry about whether or not you've fixed or done or handled correctly, they're not going to standardize anything. You can't even internally get them to standardize between genres or imprints or departments. They have no interest in doing that because what they're interested in is not your best book. They're interested in the best version of whatever that they can sell for maximum profit, which is not necessarily the same thing as your best art. Really think about that. Do I think the lack of standardization could be deliberate so that submitting to multiple publishers is actually more difficult? Oh, I hadn't thought it. Yes. Because without it being standard, you've got to juggle a lot of different things and keep a lot of plates spinning in the air. Yeah. Because again, they don't want you to succeed on multiple fronts simultaneously because that means that's multiple payouts for them. And that means you'll, on your end, will have an expectation that they're going to help disseminate your work. And that's just, they're not interested in doing that. They'll say they are. They'll get on social media. Oh, gosh, golly. They'll tell you how great it is that you're an author and how wonderful it is to sell your book. And then they'll tell you that 80% of their marketing responsibility falls to you. And your advance can only be so big because you're a first-time author. And they don't like it if you don't have a certain size audience to go to, but they won't tell you how big an audience you should get. And they won't tell you, like, how to make it bigger. They'll just expect you to have one. Because, again, these are dinosaurs, and we've asked them to try and build an iPhone. They're not built for the movement of society. There are still people, and I talked about this at some point, there are still people wondering about whether or not ebooks are going to burn out as a fad. It doesn't care if there's shipping shortages or delays or cardboard shortages or paper printing issues or ink loss or aluminum shortages that prevent the creation of those little nozzles that spray ink and printing. They don't give a shit about any of that. They just want to know what they can sell. So they keep it as difficult as possible so that you got to jump through hoops and navigate the maze. And then they can still reject you because they want to hold as many cards as possible, as frequently as possible. That is my opinion. That is my thinking. Awesome. Great question. And I went full screen. I'm also aware, in going full screen, that, this shirt's really big on me. It used to be tight. It's a little alarming. I feel like I'm swimming in this thing now that I'm seeing myself on screen, but we'll have that existential crisis later. Anyway, good question. Great question. Yeah. I probably have more to say about this. Give me a second. It also means talking to each other, and they don't really like doing that. They're just, it's an insular system. Every company lives in a little, here's this bubble, here's their bubble, nigh the twain shall meet, right? They're not interested in, building bridges between each other. The only way they're going to build a bridge to each other is if they build that bridge and then, acquire the other person. Yeah. Even though it would be really easy. It'd be really easy to standardize. Somebody goes first and says, hey, we're going to start doing this. And then you go tell the people over there they're doing it, and you just do it at a middle management level, and it'll eventually become standard practice. It'd be really easy to do, which is probably also another reason why they won't do it. It'd be too simple. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure I will have more thoughts on that tomorrow. Like, I'll just vomit them onto the Discord. Yeah, that's a great question. What a great question that is. Or I'll wake up at like 2 o'clock in the morning with like 5 more things to say. Yeah, it just bugs me. It just really bothers me that they're more intent on trying to find marketability rather than art, as if one is exclusive of the other. Because if you just slowed down a little bit and paid a little better and took your time and nurtured your creatives, you could have marketable art. It would just take a little while longer, and you'd have to spend more time giving a shit about people and their process. But companies are disinterested in doing that because to a publisher, a writer is a tool to an end. It's a means, not a person. Especially when your publisher is very large and has a skyscraper or two. That's the shit that really bothers me. And before, and I know people will hear this and go, well, John, you're just bitter that you got fired so many years ago. Yeah, I got fired decades ago. And I have worked freelance here and there for several publishers in the interim. And I served those contracts. Sometimes we yelled at each other. And sometimes they threatened. But in the end, the contract was up and I moved on. And am I still slightly bitter about what happened in the late 90s? Less so than you'd imagine. But the whole institution bothers me. It should be changed. And that's just not me being a great online internet leftist. I think the system sucks. It's become parasitic rather than symbiotic. And I think it's to a writer's advantage to literally seize the means of production, comrade, and strongly consider other avenues to produce their art, even if it means it takes more time, costs a little money, or is a different avenue than what they expect. Maybe that'll be Monday night stream. Who knows? You'll have to come back on Monday and fine. It'll probably be Monday night stream. Oof. 11. I almost said 12. Question 11. Are there ever times where I'll need to add thousands of words to my manuscript? I keep seeing people talk about cutting thousands of words, but nobody's ever really talking about adding them. Yeah, it happens. Usually when somebody's like, hey, I'm trying to write a novel, an epic novel, and you ask them how it's going, and they're like, well, I'm stuck at, some number that is very clearly not the range of the thing they're expecting. Yeah, that's where you have to add thousands. More often than not, people tend to overwrite than underwrite. And when I use over and underwrite, I don't just mean like individual detail within scenes. I mean the amount of stuff. You might have 100 underdeveloped scenes, but you've got 100 scenes as opposed to like 40. So yeah, there's going to be times where sometimes you have to add thousands, tens of thousands of words even. That happens. It's not like a bad thing. It's just it's a different thing than somebody who's got to cut. It builds different skills. Learning when you can expand, learning when you can slow down, learning a different way to organize, learning how to position the camera, how to move the reader, how to pace the story. Totally different skills than learning what not to say and when to cut and how to shape things and how to pick and choose what you need to say versus what you want to say. But yeah, there's going to be times where you have to add. I don't want to give the impression that cutting is always like you'll be cutting 60% of the time and adding 40 because everybody's different every time, every draft. But yeah, you'll end up needing to write stuff sometimes. That doesn't mean the idea is a failure either. It's just that, hey, you just need to write more. That's just how it is. Good stuff. Great question. Is it common Like, am I seeing it now with people? Yes. I have 3 clients who have underwritten who need to add more, and I'm leaving them notes to do so. And I've got 3 active clients who need to cut. And then some people are just still in the, hey, you got to get everything out of your brain and onto the page. And then we'll cut or add as needed. It's okay. It's all different routes to the same end goal. It's fine. Don't overthink it. And that leads us to, all right. I have to preface this by saying I have additional information that is not in this question. I have an email. It's several pages explaining the sales copy for this book. So consider this basically a short, quick version on how to write sales copy. Let's see if we can do this in 5 minutes, okay? Here we go. I'm absolutely stumped on how to write sales copy for this book. Can you help me? Totally. Here's where you want to start. I need you to identify the following things. Make a list. 1, I need you to get your plot into 1 or 2 sentences. I don't care if they're long-ass sentences, but you need your plot in 1 or 2 sentences. Did I hit the harp? I don't think I hit the harp. I am absolutely stumped on how to write the sales copy for this book. Can you help me? Yes, here we go. Ready? 1, identify your plot in 1 to 2 sentences. Doesn't matter if they're long or short. Just get it into 1 or 2 sentences. The whole plot. Okay? 2, I need you to identify your protagonist, your antagonist, and your major secondary characters. The sidekicks, the love interests, all that stuff. Okay? Identify those things. 3rd thing, I need you to identify, in summary, 1 to 2 sentences, what the climax of the story is, what the starting scene or scenes of the story are. Okay? Next thing, what's that, 4? 4. If you know them, and at this point you should, identify the themes. Doesn't matter how many, list as many as you can. Please hope to get more than 2, or 2 or more would be ideal, but identify the themes, okay? What you're going to do with this information once you get that done is you're going to sit down and you're going to work out a fairly loose but wordy pitch. Try to get a paragraph, 1 to 5 sentences total, that take a combination of elements, your main character, your antagonist, and some themes, or your plot and your antagonist, or your main character and your themes, or some combination of other stuff, right? Try to find a loose pitch in a couple sentences in more or less a setting that if you were to like give somebody a quick impression summary, hey, check this book out. Do you think you'd read this? If you can, dump that into a paragraph, that's the starting point for your sales copy, okay? Because what we're thinking about is we're going to identify, I got to get used to gesturing on camera. Imagine the top paragraph of a long list of paragraphs where you extol and explain the stuff in your book, okay? That first paragraph is what everybody sees before they click the read more button on Amazon. It's maybe sometimes the only paragraph they see before they scroll down and look for reviews or cover art or something else, and then they make the decision to buy the book. That first paragraph is where the gold is. It's where the big important stuff is. So we're going to prioritize putting that stuff here, okay? So we identify a character, main character, antagonist, secondary characters. We identify the plot. We identify where the climax, the start, and the end are, because those are key things you can drive reader attention to. Now, do we have to give everything away? No. Can you? Sure. This whole idea of spoilers are precious, oh my God, my pearls, I must clutch them, is dumb. You don't need to worry about that. That's some shit from social media. Just skip that. What you're trying to do, no matter what it is you write, to whatever degree you write it, what you're trying to do is arrange some presentation of facts, this plus this plus this plus this, some presentation of facts so that who's ever reading that thing will want more than you're giving them, and they have to buy the book to do that. What you're going to do is try to write each of these sentences so that they're whole sentences. You can use fragments if you need to, that's fine. But they're still whole sentences. We're not counting on hitting, dot, dot, dot every 2 seconds to sort of daisy chain this thing together and make like a story centipede of like, there's this idea and you trail off. And then there's this idea and you trail off. And then there's this idea and you trail off. You want to try and shape this so that it's a constructed chain. Link plus link plus link plus link all the way through. There are so many ways to do this, and all of them can be right. This is not, throw a dart at the dartboard in the dark and hope you get a bullseye. This is, the dartboard is fucking ginormous. Hit anywhere, and it's a good place to start. So let's suppose we want to craft this sales copy because you think your strongest thing out of all those things you listed, you think your strongest thing is your protagonist, your main character, right? So what you're going to do with your main character is make sure they are most common, the most frequently mentioned thing or the best detailed thing in that first paragraph of sales text. You're going to introduce them by name, talk about them, talk about their goals, talk about their wants. If you're going to use needs theory, talk about their needs. Or you're going to talk about the challenges they face or their effort or whatever. Introduce the reader to the character in a way that makes that character sound like, hey, I'd like more detail, please. Because the only place they can get detail is buying the book. And then once we talk about the character and what they're going through, maybe we want to contextualize that. So we talk about character and what they're going through, and then we talk about why they're going through it, because a why usually follows a what. So, here's John. John wants you to check out, his stream. Why? Because he works really hard on the stream and he likes talking to you and he likes helping you become a better writer. Becoming a better writer is difficult in a world where there's all these different distractions and all these different things vying for your attention and lots of different conflicting advice. And then we can bring it back to John because John's our main character and we think John's a really solid start to the sales copy. So we bring it back to John. John really hopes that by doing things in a certain way with a combination of profanity and sound effects and a microphone and a really comfy chair and sometimes a t-shirt, he will sit here and reach you in a way that other people can't. If you're curious, go check out the Twitch stream. We've just chained together ideas, one after the other, so that they're reasonable. We haven't suddenly grabbed some bullshit that isn't in the book. We haven't suddenly made something up that only exists in the sales copy. We've talked exactly about what the book is, who the character is, what they're doing, why it's important, what makes it hard, what makes it easy, how they do it, because that's what we're trying to sell. Now, for your book is a romance novel. So you probably want to make sure that the romance idea, the idea of this character loves that character, sits front and center because you're writing this stuff. The people who are going to buy this book are people who are looking for romance novels. So how do you write it so that the relationship between this character and that character sounds appealing? Maybe you talk about that scene where they, don't get caught in the rain, but have a good laugh about it. Maybe you're going to talk about the what is it in your book? The evil family member who wants to split them apart because they're jealous? Sure. Maybe you bring up the wacky mom character because you want to have a little bit of a corkscrew to the story. You want to kind of give everything a little bit of a torque or something. Loads of different ways to do this, but you want to pick a thing from our list. Protagonist, antagonist, secondary characters, plot, climax, start of the book, end of the book, themes. Pick one of those things and say, this is the most important right now for this draft of this paragraph. We're not carving this in stone. We're not doing this forever. We're just picking one thing this time for one paragraph. And we're putting our stamp on it. So this paragraph is going to be built around this one idea. And then we start talking about that idea. And then we grab other material that we've written, other ideas we've had that orbit that idea we picked. Main character, talk about stuff that revolves around or introduces or deals with or hooks up with the main character. When we do another paragraph, maybe we want to write a paragraph that's somewhat contrasting to that first paragraph, because now we have a starting place, so we go to the second thing. So if we start off with a romance novel, maybe we talk about one character, and then the next paragraph we talk about that second character. And then because we talked about character 1 and then character 2, that third paragraph is maybe character 1 and 2 getting together. And then we can talk about why it's difficult for them to get together or what's standing in their way. And then if you want more information, you know what you have to do. You got to click that button over here and buy that book. It doesn't need to be this whole big thing. It can be really informal. It can be really provocative. It can be very much a, hey, how you doing kind of vibe. It can be anything you want it to be. The goal is, hey, I'm going to give you just enough information, written just enough openness for you to click that button and get more detail. I'm not giving away the whole store. I'm not telling you every inch of everything. That's what reading is for. But when you're talking about crafting sales copy, you're just trying to engage the reader with enough interest to get them to move forward. Okay? And if you're still stuck, at least in terms of the how do I arrange these specifics, come back and talk to me. And I'll walk you right through it. We'll sit down, we'll spend half an hour, we'll spend an hour, and we'll go right through it. But the general idea is pick and choose stuff, find a way those pieces are related to each other, and then write it down in a way that somebody else who doesn't know what you know would go, ooh, tell me more. And that's where you're like, well, I'll tell you more if you buy the book. Great question. I didn't do it in 5 minutes. I apologize, but it's still good. Are there any other questions? That's not the right button, John. That's the button. Are there any other questions? Anybody? About anything? No? Yes? No? Click that button. All right. Shall we go to the outro? Where's my outro button, Linus? Oh. It's over here. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I want to thank you for letting me talk about Hamlet and the beach and publishing and organizing ideas and technical stuff and needs theory and everything in between. Thanks so much for being here. This was a lot of fun tonight. I had a really good time. Thanks for enduring me in a t-shirt. I never did get a chance to put my hoodie on. Rest assured, I will in a minute. Actually, I'm just going to go put a bathrobe on, but that's neither here nor there. Thank you so much for being here. I needed this tonight. Thank you. You, as always, have continued to save my life. Let's see. When's the next time we'll be together? Oh my God, it is February. The next time we'll be here will be on February the 2nd? No, that can't be right. No, that is correct. February the 2nd. 7 p.m. Eastern. Oh, man. Oh, man. At the same time, it feels like it's a million miles away, and it feels like it's tomorrow. That's crazy how time works. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. All power to all people. Take care of each other. Take care of yourself. Tell people you love them. Don't let people get you down. Fuck them if they can't take a joke. You're really good enough, and you can do this. You just got to keep going. I know it's hard. I know there's not always answers. I know it feels overwhelming, but you can absolutely do your best. I believe in you. And I love you. You're good. And I'll talk to you very, very soon. See ya!